I posted this video on Facebook a couple of weeks ago and people lost their mind. When you're doing a split squat, I want you to think of taking the escalator, not the elevator. So this is what I don't want you to do. This is what I do want you to do. So let's dive into it. There was a study where they compared a squat where the knees were able to move freely versus a squat where the knees were literally stopped by a wooden block. The squat where the knees were stopped by the wooden block did decrease the knee torque by 22%, but the hip torque was increased by 1,000%. So the stress on the knees was decreased, but there was much more stress on the hips and lower back region during the squat. So the stress has to go somewhere, and the stress where the knees do go over the toes naturally when you squat is not too much for healthy knees to handle. When we're squatting, we want the barbell to be over the middle of our feet. That's going to put us in a stable position, which is going to be our strongest position to squat in. So this really depends what sort of squat you're going to do. So if you're going to do a barbell front squat, you're going to be more upright and your knees will probably track more over your toes. If you're doing a barbell back squat, your knees are going to travel a little bit over your toes if you fall naturally to keep the barbell over the middle of your feet. With the low bar back squat, because the barbell's lower on our back and we're trying to bias the glutes in that squat, our knees aren't going to travel as far over our toes. If you look at Olympic lifters, they're lifting heavy weights and their knees are flying over their toes and their heels are staying down. So people will go, oh my gosh, this is so bad. But then why are they doing it at such an elite level of sport? Well, it's so that they get as low as they can in the squat, often to catch the barbell overhead or to catch it in the front rack position. If their knees didn't travel over their toes, they wouldn't be able to get low enough to catch the barbell in the front rack position or overhead. If they kept their knees behind their toes, they'd literally fall forward and the barbell has too much weight on it that it would make them fall over and they would drop the rep. Even when I was first starting to learn how to squat, I was told not to put my knees over my toes from the personal trainer that owned the gym. So I used to squat like that and I used to drive my hips back, and when I felt like my knees were going over my toes, I used to have to kind of push my butt back to try and squat deeper, and my lower back would always hurt. And now I understand why. The stress that was going to be on my knees that they could handle anyway was going to my hips and my lower back, and then I just didn't really like squatting because it felt uncomfortable. I didn't have the mobility to keep my knees behind my toes and do a deep squat because I was trying to do a barbell back squat, but that may have worked if I did a low bar squat. So is knees over toes safe? If you have healthy knees, yes. You probably don't have to try and push your knees as far forward as possible, but if your knees naturally travel over your toes so that you can sit deep into your squat or into your split squat, it's going to be safe. However, if you don't have healthy knees, if you have dodgy knees, then don't do it. Choose other exercises that are more hip dominant that aren't going to get the knees going over the toes if that feels uncomfortable for you. But just because you can't do it doesn't mean that everyone else shouldn't do it. And that's the problem that I have in the comment section of my posts is everyone saying it's bad, don't do it, don't do it. I've had knee surgery, I've had knee reconstruction. But that's your situation. Don't push that on other people that are able to do it just because you can't. A few other things to think about when you are squatting and split squatting with your knees. We don't want knee valgus, which is where your knees are caving in, or knee varus, where your knees are caving out. We want to keep them in line with our toes. Whether they're going over our toes or not, we do want to keep our knees in line with our toes. We want to limit the bouncing at the bottom of the squat. You can see some people, when they go too fast on the way down, they bounce off the ground and come up. There's some research that suggests that that increases the shear force on the knees by 33%. So to avoid that, you could try controlling the eccentric down, and instead of bouncing, you could just come up. And lastly, if you're too tired, you may be at more risk of injuring your knee because fatigue leads to less proprioception or awareness of your body, which can mean less knee stability. So sure, you can do reps when you're tired, but if your knees are wobbly and you're trying to do your reps and you simply are like really struggling to get up, maybe it's not the best to have a really heavy weight on your squat or your split squats. Hopefully that helps you to decide whether you should be putting your knees over your toes. Cheers.